Hello everyone and welcome to week 8 of the Business Web Practices Speaker Series. Today we have a talk on accessibility by a person I've known for a long time, and her name is Eliza Greenwood. So let's hear it for Eliza.
Thank you very much. Fantastic. Well, I do enjoy a little bit of audience interaction, so I appreciate learning a little bit more about you before we got started. And I'm just interested, you all are pursuing a degree here at Clark in the same thing, or no? You have
Different
a whole,
thing.
Say it again?
Different things.
Yeah, what
some
about?
of us are doing web development and some are doing graphics and web graphics.
Okay.
All that.
Computer support,
Computer support.
Computer networking, okay, a whole variety. Anyone? Graphic design. Anyone here for just an elective? Awesome, hooray. Okay, cool. So Bruce asked me to come in and speak today on a topic that I'm very passionate about, and that is digital accessibility, and I like to see where I can make that overlap with marketing. I wish that it overlapped more often, so this is kind of my take on where it does overlap, and from a business perspective as well. My website is elizagreenwood.com, and my Twitter handle is @E_LizaG. So I welcome you all to tweet out and follow me there and find me on LinkedIn and connect. Ooh, that went fast. A little bit more about me. Everyone can see the slides okay? I'm a freelance digital marketer. I specialize in social media, analytics, pay-per-click advertising. I like all sorts of other things as well, content strategy and SEO and whatnot, but that's kind of where I end up most of the time. Going up and around clockwise, I'm also an accessibility evangelist. You'll see hashtag A11Y, and that's a hashtag that I find really useful when I'm researching about accessibility on Twitter, and even in Google it works. It's a numeronym for the word accessibility because it starts with an A and ends in a Y and has 11 letters in between. So we say A11Y, and sometimes we say ally, but really it's A11Y. I'm an A11Y evangelist. I've been to the CSUN conference a couple of times. I presented there in March. That's a big conference that a lot of A11Y professionals and enthusiasts go to. I also evangelize to marketers in Portland, and I evangelize across my own social channels, all about accessibility. I've had a whole bunch of different careers in my life. I was a theater major in college. I was a patent clerk at Sharp Labs, and I made a film, a documentary. It's called Austin Unbound, A Deaf Journey of Transgender Heroism. There's more information on my website, elizagreenwood.com, if you're interested in that kind of a documentary. It kind of feels like a lifetime ago, but at the time that I was making the film, I was also sign language interpreting. So, you know, through all this this love for evangelism and theater and deaf culture and sign language interpreting, I have a deaf sister. I became really interested in the broader scope of disability justice. And when it was time for me to make a career change, I got really excited about marketing because I like evangelizing and I'm always passionate about a project or a cause. And at that time, I got into marketing and got really excited about accessibility online and what exactly that means, digital accessibility online. Going around to the end there, I'm a Beaverton transplant. I just recently moved to Beaverton after living in North Portland for 12 years. Before that, I was living in Washington, D.C., and I really, really love Vancouver because when I was a sign language interpreter, I interpreted at a middle school in Evergreen School District over at Cascade Middle School. So it's fun to be across both rivers, actually, now that I'm living in Beaverton. I guess that's it there. I do want to encourage you to raise your hand at any time if you have questions or comments along the way. And I'm going to just hide this mouse because I think that I'll do better with the keyboard. This presentation will examine the business cases for digital accessibility, review some accessibility processes, and provide case examples of accessibility priorities. I'm also going to invite you to tweet out. So use that hashtag A11Y if you learn something tag me in it. Like I said, follow me, and also if you have a question that you kind of want to just hold on to or post to the group, go ahead and tweet it out, and we'll check it at the end, or I'll make sure to check them later on. So please, does this class have a hashtag that you all use?
No.
No. Are you Twitter? Who here's on Twitter? I know Bruce is on Twitter. Okay. Probably more Facebook crowd, probably. I always have to ask people where they are on social media. In fact, I'll just be sitting next to someone on a plane, and I'll be like, well, what social channels do you use? Are you on Snapchat or Kik? Has anyone heard of Kik?
Yeah.
Yeah? Who here's on Kik?
I used to be.
You used to be on
Yeah.
Kik? Okay. I'm so interested in Kik. I got on Kik, and I went through, the uploading of contacts process, and I had like one contact from other channels on Kik. And then we had this whole long conversation. I was like, oh, that's what you use it for. Okay, so anyway, I love social media. So some Twitter, LinkedIn users.
Kind of.
Well, this crowd is not crazy about social media, I'm thinking.
Well, poll them on each one of the channels. I'm just curious.
Okay, so we're going to do big raise of hands. Facebook, the biggie for sure. LinkedIn. It's a good one to be on if you want a job in this area. Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat. What am I forgetting?
MySpace.
Are you on MySpace?
It's still there.
Yeah? What kind of song do you have on your profile?
Bluegrass.
Nice. All right. Good. Well, we're learning a lot about each other. This is awesome. A few terms for you to pay attention to. PWD, you might see stands for people with disabilities. A11Y I mentioned is accessibility. And then I mentioned a bunch of these other government acronyms: DOL, Department of Labor; DOJ, Department of Justice; GSA, General Services Administration. That's like about procurement, when government decides how they're going to go about allocating funds and who they're going to purchase from. That's what the GSA is about. And then Department of Transportation, what the airline industry is governed under. Any questions so far? Pretty straightforward so far, right? What I am personally really fired up about within disability justice is employment issues. And I get really fired up about them because of a huge disparity that I see between people with disabilities and people who don't claim to have disabilities. Just recently, the Department of Labor, October 2016, labor force participation statistics say that people with disabilities are participating at 20% in the labor force, and people without disabilities are at 68.6%. These numbers are about the same as what they were in July, the last time I did a presentation. So the numbers right now are pretty stable, and they're pretty high actually, because there's a war for talent out there. There's a lot of jobs and not enough talent, depending on what industry you're in. So I get really excited about that, and that's an area that I'd love to see more movement of closing that gap between people with disabilities and people without disabilities. And where I end up looking at it in marketing and in social media is, of course, that people are using social media for their job hunts, right? And recruiters are using social media in their battle for talent to try and find the talent. So 79% of job seekers are using social media in their job search, and 40% of job seekers with disabilities experience usability issues on social media. So to me, that doesn't feel like a good way to bridge that gap, right? If that's where the jobs are being promoted, I mean, that's where all the eyeballs are, right? So if you're in marketing and you're trying to help and you're trying to work on a recruiting or a talent acquisition initiative, you're going to be marketing on social media. And so I've done a lot of work with the Partnership for Employment and Accessible Technology. That's PEAT, that's listed there. It's not in the beginning on the terms list. Looking at kind of how they can work on bridging those gaps, specifically around social media and helping employers make their channels more accessible to people with disabilities. So that's where my passion is on it these days. Who is affected? When you say people with disabilities and online accessibility, there's a whole bunch. When you get into disability justice, and disability scholarship, there's all sorts of categories of disabilities and all sorts of arguments for different types of issues in the human condition that someone may be able to claim disability, right? Like HIV status, that can be considered a disability, or a woman who's pregnant may temporarily be disabled, right? So when we're talking about kind of digital accessibility, online accessibility, there are four areas, three that we're really going to be talking about today. The first one here, the wheelchair, kind of symbolizing mobility, right? So if you don't have good mobility with your hands, then you may need different kinds of devices to access the computer, or whether it's a different kind of a mouse or eye gaze technology, or you can use your keyboard to move forward online. Cognitive disabilities. So any ideas on how a cognitive impairment might make it difficult for someone to access things online?
Basic understanding or memory as well.
There's a whole range of cognitive impairments, right? And with the way that things are changing so much online so fast, it's not only about the way that it's laid out online, it's also just about how everything, you look at Facebook one day and you kind of know how to navigate it, and the next day it might be completely different. And then this symbol down on the bottom left is for sign language interpreters. It's people who are deaf or hard of hearing, and it talks, that's more about captions, and then of course the next one is a person with a cane, so that would be someone with a vision impairment. So those people are most affected when it comes to accessibility online. Questions about that? Does anyone here know anyone with a mobility impairment that might affect them online? Couple? How about a cognitive impairment? I'm seeing some nods. Yeah. Does anyone know anyone here? Does anyone here know someone with hearing loss, where that might be harder for them to? Someone's self-identifying there. Yep. And how about someone with vision impairment? Yep. Bruce might know some people.
I may be that people.
Bruce may be, so we might pick on you a little bit, Bruce. I have a feeling that Bruce has actually been at this a lot, around this topic a lot longer than I have. So he's going to jump in and interject as whenever he feels like it, really. Who is affected? I have a video here. Now I'm going to use my mouse. It says it poses a security risk. I watched it last night and it's fine. Do you want to continue? Yeah, so this is, it's okay. Tommy Edison. Let's see if the volume is, I assume the volume is good to go.
If not, I don't.
Okay. Dun dun dun. Nope. I don't like that. Do you want to continue? Yes. Videos. Give me access. Okay. Well, if you'll bear with me, I'll just pull it up online. This is a Tommy Edison video on YouTube. How blind people use the computer. Who here has been around a screen reader user that you know of? Does anyone, can you explain what a screen reader user is, or what a screen reader is?
Well, the woman who I knew had two devices. One was, or I should say, one piece of software on one device. The piece of software on her computer was a text-to-speech conversion program.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it speaking very rapidly.
Yeah.
So, and she was very adept at interacting with it through keyboard. The other device she had was a Braille printer that she could read with her fingers.
Mm-hmm.
And she was unbelievably good with that. So, highly trained on both of those technologies.
Cool. Did everyone get that? Hear that okay? Okay. This is, yes, I want to continue. This is Tommy Edison showing how he uses a screen reader on his cell phone. And he doesn't have the settings quite so fast, so you should be able to understand it. But I totally know what you mean, because a lot of times when I go to these accessibility conferences, they'll do demos about how inaccessible a page is, and they'll use a screen reader, and I'm like, I don't hear what's going on because they're going so fast. I can't even understand what the words are.
It's like an auctioneer.
It's like an auctioneer. It's so fast. Volume.
I'm gonna help you out.
Yeah, I like that.
We ran into the same issue.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Sure.
So right over here somewhere, there's volume.
Yep. Gonna blast you.
Oh, it's gonna blast. Yeah, remember we had this issue last time? Whoa, that's loud.
Does it say muted? No.
No, please hold. I'm gonna try it in Chrome.
Okay. There we go. It's the top one there.
We're not there yet. Why do you need to know who I am?
We may not be there.
And made an unsolicited cold call to a
Yeah.
business owner. It's a sandwich shop.
Boom.
And
You
some
can-
friends of
I
mine
gotcha.
having lunch there.
Okay, we're
A
skipping
lot of people are
that.
curious. They wonder, blind people using the computer? Come on, how does that work? Hey, it works pretty good. This here is a 2009 MacBook Pro, right? I think it's like a 13-inch screen. It's a little bit. What do I need the big screen for? Anyway, there's an option on this machine that will actually read the screen to me. You can find it in System Preferences. Just go to Accessibility, and there it is. It's called VoiceOver.
Welcome to OS 10. VoiceOver is running. System Preferences, Accessibility Window, Toolbar.
So let's say I want to send somebody an email. Now remember, I'm in VoiceOver, so it works a little bit differently, right? But we'll go to the dock,
Dock. Finder.
and that's the Finder, and then we go across to Mail. So on the way we have
Launchpad. Mission Control. App Store. Dashboard. Mail.
and there's Mail. So now I hit the space bar to open it.
And Finder. Desktop. 865 rows added.
All right, so let's compose a new piece of mail. So to do this, we'll hit Command N.
New message window. To edit text.
Now it asks to whom I'm going to send it, so we'll send it to hello at
Hello at
Blind Film Critic.
Blind Film Critic. Period. Com.
Now you hear it repeat what I'm typing here too, so we'll tab across now to see.
CC. Edit text.
So we don't need to CC.
Subject. Edit text.
Our subject will be what fun!
Fun.
Exclamation.
Exclaim.
Now we'll tab across to where we can write our note.
Edit text. And comma. Space. What fun we had today. H. Shooting. Videos. Period. Space. U. Rock. Space. T. E.
And now all we have to do is send it. We use Command and Shift at the same time, and then D. Hey, so now let's keep that email address between us, all right? No spammers, any of that kind of thing, all right? Please? Thank you. So the fun you have now that we showed you how to set this all up and everything, go to your friend's Mac.
Okay, what do you think about that? Interesting, huh?
So how old is that? Don't they have the voice recognition now, or would actually type what he says? Do they have that yet for that system?
I imagine that, yeah, like on a phone, even on an iPhone, it could do that if you wanted. I don't like using voice recognition as much as I like typing out, especially if you have the commands, you know, you want to enter in keyboard shortcuts. So it's probably just down to user preference.
They do have the voice input,
Mm-hmm.
but you know, the problem with voice input from a blind user, it's gonna read it back to you anyway, so you know if it's wrong or right, right? in that mode, Dave. 'Cause it's gonna say, it's gonna read it back, and then you have to figure out, where exactly you are. It can get really difficult.
So as it goes, you can correct it as it goes, as you type. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and you just become more adept at it because
Right, okay.
you have to, right? Yeah. So so he does a great job of showing all sorts of funny things. He has other videos describing colors to blind people, how blind people find Braille signs, what a blind person thinks about racism, blind taste test, brand name versus store brand. These are some that I want to go watch. They sound funny, but he's done some funny ones, and it just kind of gives you an idea of someone's perspective who's navigating the world with different technology, right? And someone worth looking up for sure. And the reason that I'm starting out actually with his video when we're talking about all the different types of accessibility issues when it comes to accessing things online is that out of those types of disabilities, the blind community has made the most inroads and made the most progress as far as comments in the back.
It does surprise me that not everybody uses that because it saves so much time to use the keyboard rather than just the mouse.
It surprises you people don't learn more keyboard shortcuts and they just forget their mouses entirely?
Yeah, they save a lot of time.
Yeah.
Use all the keyboard programs.
Man, they have a no mouse challenge every year on Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and I think it's in May, and I was like, I'm going to do it this month. I'm going to do it for a whole day. I'm going to do it for an hour. Like, I love my mouse so much. I need my mouse, but you really don't. I mean, you just have to learn. You have to learn the keyboard shortcuts, right? And you have to just kind of, you have to dedicate yourself to that learning curve. I mean, maybe I would do okay with it if I just said, okay, well, I'm just going to do it for an hour of emails, and then I could just learn the email keyboard shortcuts. But for me, I'm on there multitasking. I want to go back and forth between my social and my email and, typing stuff up, creating content. So I have a long way to go on keyboard shortcuts. Do you know a lot of keyboard shortcuts yourself? In the back there? No? No.
No one does.
I mean, we all use like Control S, Control V, right? Control X. But I could learn some more advanced keyboard shortcuts for sure. In terms of the business of accessibility online, there has been the most need from the blind community that's been most vocalized and the most progress from the blind community. So we can talk a little bit more about that. It just makes sense. I mean, video is becoming so much more important. So the deaf community is making progress on getting captions for video, but as far as accessing a website, it's really the most problematic for people who are blind. And there's more going on for people with cognitive disabilities. As far as mobility, I don't think that that's so much on the digital side as it is on the device side. And I'm sure that there's some use case where that's not the case at all, but it tends probably with eye gaze technology. Anyway, that's when you look up A11Y, a lot of times people will say, well, it's not fully accessible, and really what they're talking about is if it's accessible to people who are blind or not. But I like to look at it from all perspectives of all different types of disabilities whenever possible. So getting into the business cases, here I am using my mouse again. Focusing on the three. Prevalence by disability type. Now, another thing that you'll hear if you look at some of the discourse out there about accessibility, there are statistics about how many people in the US, for example, have disabilities. And you'll hear 1 in 5 or 1 in 4, 20%, 19% of the population has a disability. As far as how that affects people online, the numbers are a lot lower, right? So this is according to the Disability Compendium from 2014, people with hearing loss. And I focus on ages 18 to 64 years old. So, of course, after 64 years old, the numbers are going to go up quite a bit, right? For hearing loss, for example. But for hearing loss, 2.1% of the population from 18 to 64 years old has hearing loss. So, and among the people with hearing loss, 50.7% of them are employed. Among the visually impaired, 1.9% of them ages 1.9% of the population, ages 18 to 64, has vision impairment, and they have 40% employment rates. And then cognitive is double, 4.4 has cognitive impairments, and they're at 24% employment. So we've got 24% to 50% employment among each of these groups.
Is this only in the U.S.?
These are U.S. numbers. The Disability Compendium is part of a U.S. I think that they're related with the census.
Can you explain the 2.1%? Is that 2.1% of the entire population or 2.1% of working population?
Yeah, good question. So that's people ages 18 to 64.
Yes.
All the people in the U.S. ages in the year 2014.
So it's all people.
All people ages 18 to 64. 2.1% of them have hearing loss. 1.9% of them have vision impairment, and 4.4% of them have cognitive impairment. So all total, that would be 8% if people stayed in their nice categories, right? Like if somebody with vision impairment didn't also have hearing loss. But of course, people have multiple disabilities. So the numbers, and some people don't report, and so the numbers can't ever be super clean. But we're looking at about 8% as far as people who may really be impacted by online accessibility initiatives. And breaking that down a little bit better, how many people are we talking about here? So in the year 2014, in that age range, 18 to 64 years old, there were 195 million people total. So if you're just going with that 8% kind of number, then you're looking at about 16 million people. It's a lot of people. Could change a election result with that number of people, right? It's a lot of people. But is it enough to make a business case? Right? What kinds of jobs are we looking at getting into? And if you're looking at making a digital asset more accessible, in what kind of a situation would you say, oh yeah, let's go ahead and spend 20% more budget on this, making it more accessible, because then 16 million more people are going to buy it, if you're looking at a population of 195 million. So you can look at the numbers a whole bunch of different ways, and the business case scenario is not that we should be doing this because it's the right thing to do. But as far as let's make everything 100% accessible to all people with all disabilities, it just doesn't scale. It doesn't scale because the technology changes too fast. It's just not where we are. So for me as a marketer, that's kind of what I specialize in, is looking at what the goals are for the product, and looking at the type of audience that may be needing to access that product or that service, and then figuring out how you can prioritize your resources, right? If you get into working with government assets and whatnot, then you need to be accessible to hopefully everybody, as much of the people as possible all of the time. But it's not always pragmatic, unfortunately. But there are lots of business cases. So more recently, we've had this web accessibility enforcement through the legal system, and it's really been the Wild West. As Bruce was pointing out to me, there's no case law. There have been settlements. There have been lots of fat settlements out of court, and there have been judges that have said, yeah, we'll hear this, let's move forward with it, but they've all been settled out of court. So we don't have any case law to support it, but we do have laws that have been passed down. The Department of Justice is, really excited, or has been as of these last several years, really excited about digital accessibility. And some of the laws that you can kind of take a look at, Section 508 is part of the Rehabilitation Act, and that's related with the GSA, government procurement. So if you're part of university or government, and you're hiring a contractor to create a website for you, then you want that website to be completely accessible. Otherwise, you're violating Section 508. And Section 508 has specific criteria of what web accessibility is, right? Is that criteria up to date with today's standards? No, it's not up to date. But there's a criteria, right? It's something. 21st Century Communications and Video Act. I didn't add the American for Disabilities Act here. That kind of goes, it should be here. It should be at the top. That's under the Department of Justice. 21st Century and Communications Video Act is under the Department of Justice. And then the Air Carrier Access Act is under the Department of Transportation. So all of these different laws that have been put into place all have thoughts and lawsuits in process around making things accessible. And is it only the public sector? No, it's private as well. Internationally, this is also a big deal, especially all across Canada, but especially in Ontario, Europe, Australia, India. I think Middle East has stuff. I mean, internationally, there's a lot of big conversations happening around web accessibility and this wicked problem that we have, right, of the technology changing so fast, and how do you keep up with it? Sometimes it just kind of self-corrects. Like iPhone was able to roll out a bunch of stuff that provided accessibility, and then the market kind of adjusted with it, and so a lot of people didn't have to go and buy all those extra devices and whatnot now that they have their iPhones or their Apple computers. But a lot of the times it just takes the laws to be enforcing it. I guess what I'm trying to say with that is that like Apple was actually very proactive about building accessibility into their features. How are we all doing with this? I'm getting lots of head nods, but I'm kind of going all over the place. So, questions, comments, thoughts? Well, you're doing great at raising your hand, so I appreciate it. The biggie that everyone refers to is Target from 2008, and this was settled as a class. There was a class action lawsuit that was settled. It was the NFB, the National Federation for the Blind, that sued Target. And from what I understand, the argument was Target said, well, we need to make our stores accessible, because those are public spaces, right? Our stores need to be accessible, people with wheelchairs or whatnot. But our website, that's not a public space. That's private. And it was the first of its kind, and it really set the stage for a lot of other lawsuits after that, because the judge said, no. And then there was a settlement, and Target had to pay, what does it say here, $6 million in class damages, 3.7 in attorney fees and costs, but their own legal costs remain unpublished. The amount that they spent on the class damages and the attorney's fees and costs, I don't know what that would compare to what it actually costs for them to fix it, right? Because if you build something that's not accessible and then you have to go back and fix it, that's a really different problem than building it accessibly from the beginning. So now Target goes to all the accessibility conferences, and they like to kind of stay ahead of the game now. I think they like to be on the other end of that. And so there's an example of a private company that had to comply. And then Netflix, more recently in 2012, that was against the National Association for the Deaf, and I'm seeing a head nod over here. Do you want to share? Oh.
I'm an advocate for the deaf community with my organization as well as professionally. There's been a long battle of deaf people trying to go to movie theaters, and they can't enjoy the movie because it's not captioned. Technology is very extremely expensive for the movie theater company to do it. So now we're converging to different technology with DVDs and streaming, and all that. Captioning is still way far behind schedule. It is much harder to text, caption from voice to text than text to voice. So the technology is not quite there for us to do automatic captioning, which is why YouTube auto captioning has full of errors.
Yeah.
And also when you watch television, it has full of errors. But if you have a live person captioning, especially on a live national news, it's pretty accurate because they're hired by the legal transcriptionists, and they have to mandate their certification with 90% accuracy rate. So technology is not there to replace the human.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be 5-10 second delay. So Netflix suffered tremendously because it was a very booming business at the time with the technology, but they did not include all of these customers, which is why I said to you in my earlier presentation, know your customers. You're going to exclude 16 million people who do not have your website accessible. So imagine the revenue power for the company as well. So.
I agree. Yeah, it's and these numbers here, 755,000, 40,000 for implementation. So 755,000 to the plaintiff's lawyers, 40,000 for implementation. I think it costs a lot more than $40,000 to caption all their videos, because they were required to caption all of their video content, right? So they already had the technology in place for the captions to be there on their video content. But how many hours of video content are we talking about? And they were required to caption them all. And they were given like 2 years, I think. Yeah, it was like 2 years. So they had some catching up to do, right? And possibly some strategizing to do. They may have eliminated some of their programming because they didn't, it's not cheap. It takes 5 minutes, I think. For each 1 minute of video, it takes 5 minutes to caption it. Right? Yeah, so it's, even if the technology is already there, it takes human power, right? Man and woman power. Yeah.
It's a business decision, basically.
It's a business decision?
Not to do it. It required a lawsuit
Sure.
in order to do it, because it's a business decision, that they didn't care about that 5% of their business. Right? Just like GM had faulty gas tanks. It was a business decision not to fix that. They rolled the dice. So it was a business decision rather than to do that, spend that money now. They were forced to do it later. Under adverse conditions. So.
Or it was an oversight. I mean, it happens because people just aren't thinking about it.
They just don't think about it.
Well,
and they had some captioned content.
It costs that much.
Yeah.
It's just, they're running on tight margins, and somebody just made that decision like, well, until they force us to do it, we're not going to do it.
I mean, we all have to do that, right?
Yes.
Like I recently bought my house, and we were remodeling, and I'm like, I'm going to be like HGTV. I'm sure Bruce was like, oh my gosh, here we go again. There's her bathroom. Oh, great. Like I'm going to video myself, right? So I'm like, here's the house, and here's the floors, and we're going to rip off the wallpaper, and the walls are going to be gray. And I have a lot of friends on Facebook who are deaf, and they're like, all right, thanks for all the video, But was I in the middle of a renovation project gonna then like go home and for my 3-minute video that I just put up online spend 15 minutes like captioning it, and then another, and it would take me longer than 15 minutes because I don't do it all the time, right? So how do you, and that was a business decision on my part because I have clients who are deaf, and and so I did some videos in sign language, and I'm like, okay, well I can kind of try and meet your needs here, but how do you pick? How do you prioritize? It's tough. I'm very curious about the actual numbers here, but I have a feeling we're probably not going to find out how much they paid the NAD and how much it actually cost them to get caught up. But that problem isn't going away, is it? With video. So the lawsuit side of things is it's been great for people in accessibility, right? We're like, yeah, go get them. We're like ambulance chasers. We're like, get them, and we're going to come fix your problems, and we're going to take care of you. Cha-ching, And I don't know what's going to happen now. Lainey Feingold, I just on my LinkedIn shared an article by Lainey Feingold. She's an accessibility legal expert, and she was writing about, with this new legislation, what might happen with the courts, and what kind of support they may be offering or withdrawing in terms of accessibility in our space. So that remains to be seen. But that aspect of things is, this is my cartoon about the carrot and the stick. Everyone's always joking about the carrot and the stick. This is their new big carrot and stick method. So in case you can't see it, there's 2 office people standing there, and there's walking down the hallway, big giant carrot, like a big bird-sized carrot with a big stick, right? So the big stick is the lawsuits, and then the carrot side of it, carrots. We all love carrots. The carrot side of it is that there's these arguments and business case arguments for making things accessible because it's the right thing to do and because it can generate more revenue, right? Like if you're looking at a specific demographic or, if there's all sorts of arguments, which actually I'll explain next, that say, hey, do accessibility because it's the right thing to do, but also because it will increase your revenue. Also because there's a business case for it that's going to reach an untapped argument. In terms of the war for talent, we need more people to fill more jobs, and hey, people with disabilities actually have really low turnover rates. So there's a business case there for hiring more people with disabilities and getting those jobs in front of them, right? In terms of this is this inclusive design formula, right? Like if you design things that are easier to use, this is this this UX principle I'm always hearing, like it's like a chant or a mantra or something. If you make it easy, then it's better. What is it? What do UX people say? The more simple the design, the better it is. Period. That's not how. It's much more eloquent than that when they say it. Don't make people think, right? Like just make it simple is better. Yeah. Yep. And that's hunky-dory. If you can do it, that's awesome. So the idea, the concept here with my little pictographs with a picture of, the person who's holding up their ear, the hearing waves, it's not a thing. Airwaves, by audio waves. Sound waves, the blind person, and then the cognitive impairment. If you design with all of these people in mind, you get more carrots. Right? Like more people can use your products, and there are use cases for this. Like there's some kitchen utensils where someone said, "Oh, it's hard for me to hold my potato peeler, because it's so thin, and I wish my potato peeler were thicker because I have arthritis." And then I don't remember the name of the company. They went and made more potato peelers that were thicker, and it turned out lots of people like to buy the thicker potato peelers because they're easier to use, right? Or like the door handles that you just have to push instead of having to grab onto. There's lots of accessibility innovation that is created around people with disabilities, and then everyone ends up being happy that it's there. Like I always have stuff in my hands, so I'm thrilled if there's some kind of option where I can get more function out of something without having to have one of my hands free, for example. And all these business cases, like I said, are really good for when they work, and they just don't always work for everything. The one that I'm excited about is the baby boomer business case scenario. So in the year 2010, 13.1% of the population was 65 and older. And they're projecting that by the year 2030, 19.3% of the population is going to be 65 and older. And they're the ones with the money, right? They're the ones with all the disposable income. So what do you think happens to those? What are you thinking?
I'm not thinking that's true, but maybe.
It's hard for you to imagine? Oh, that the baby boomers don't have all the money?
No. Well, I'm not going to. No healthcare costs.
Because you all will have all the money, right?
I'm not.
Do you think millennials have the most spending power, or Generation X, or baby boomers, or?
It depends what demographic you're in.
Yeah. Sure.
What area it all depends.
Yeah. Sure, that's fair. IBM is one of the leaders in the accessibility space, and they are throwing lots of resources into researching baby boomers around cognitive disabilities. And that was actually how they were able to get all of this research funded, was by looking at where the wealth is in the country. And they looked at the business case of baby boomers aging and baby boomers becoming increasingly more disabled, right? You looked at those numbers, 2.4% of the population has this disability, has that disability, and then you get into over 65, then the numbers are going to go up. So IBM believes it. I believe it. Yeah. And of course, in different pockets, it's not necessarily going to apply, but there's another business case for making things more accessible, right? Because the baby boomers are going to be aging into more disabilities. And if you're not disabled now, you're temporarily going to be disabled at some point in your life. So.
And a lot of the baby boomers are not digital natives.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of the stuff is, like my mother. Mom, if you're listening, you never learned how to use anything because you, well, I can't say why, but she just didn't.
Yeah. She didn't have to. Yeah, she made it work otherwise. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Mom.
Hey, Bruce's mom. Well, I don't know what else to say about that. So that's what I have on the business cases of making things accessible. Any other thoughts or things to add on the business cases, and then we'll get into some of the kind of more processy stuff.
I have one thing to mention. In the deaf world, remember when iPod first came out? Everybody was blaring up the volume so high on the iPod. We're getting more and more deaf people now suffering from hearing loss through the iPod generation.
Huh.
So the deaf
technology is actually interesting. Did we have one over here?
Yeah. We're just coming out of a week of studying content marketing. And so I was wondering what you thought about accessibility as potentially content to market for services and websites. It seems like that socially that a company could promote itself and its brand in a positive light by saying they're accessible.
Yes, I love that business case. Absolutely.
So.
And that's where a lot of the values are, and that's where the values are going too with millennials, is towards inclusion and everything, right? So making that part of your strategy of, hey, come work for us, we're inclusive, or buy our products, we're inclusive. Like people were flying the rainbow flags, right? And there was lots of business cases around if you put that you're in support of GLBT rights, then people will favor your brand more, people will buy your products more. I'd love to see the accessibility train, gain as much favor. Let's do it.
I don't know if this is redundant or not, but when you think about that 20%, 65 plus, I mean, you're going to know, you may not be disabled, but you're going to know somebody who is. And so their ability to use those, so you're not only just marketing to those people, you're marketing to the people that are friends and family, relatives, cousins, brothers, co-workers.
And one of the reasons
that you want them to be able to have access just like everybody else.
No, totally. And one of the reasons that I'm passionate about it is because, like I said, I have a younger sister who's deaf, and she was so hungry just to have a normal, like, teenage experience, right? And I remember wanting to just be able to go to the movies with her. And I still dream of the day when I can just go up and I can buy my ticket and we'll go together. And it's friends, too. I'd like to be able to just go with friends. I buy my ticket and I say, could you just turn the captions on, please? And then they just turn them on. And then I have captions. At any time that I want, I could just go watch a movie with captions on it. I know lots of people don't like to have the captions on the bottom of the screen. I get that. But I don't really get it. Like, I just want to be able to have captions at any time. And if a company was providing that, I would feel like I was benefiting because I got to go do that with, with my sister or my close friend. Absolutely.
This is new to me to understand why they don't have it in the theater, because when you go to an opera and it's in Italian, they have a written board across the top of the screen with the English translation. So why can't they do it in the movie theater? It just makes sense that they should be able to.
Yeah, I wish that they did.
What they do have is the captioning glasses, which I actually tried.
The glasses.
Yeah, where you just put the glass on. It looks like a 3D glass.
How was it?
3D glass. It was great, I thought.
Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, the glass has some sort of electronic screen where you see the captions in the bottom. Only you can see them.
Have you tried the glasses?
I have. I think it's some hit and misses with that.
Yeah.
It really depends on the quality of the equipment for one. It depends on the quality of the actual text and everything. But it's funny because it takes a while for us to get acquired to it, because it's interrupting your vision. So when you're seeing something, you want to engross yourself in that scene, then you have this thing that's just coming right across your eye. So it's a hit or miss, and it's really odd, because that group is unique in the sense that each accommodation is very individualized. It is not a standard, say, this is what they get from accommodation, because each person as a deaf person has very different individual preferences. And that's what makes the technology so much harder for us.
Yeah.
Because it's just the nature of our disability. Now, that may not be the same for other groups.
Yep.
So that is the ongoing holy grail thing. So as long as we have options of different deliverables to choose, the better the accessibility is for us.
I remember maybe 2000, and my younger sister came and she spent the night, and she brought a box so we could have captions on the TV. We had to plug it in the back and set it up. You remember? It was not joking, this box that we had to hook into the TV just to have captions on television at home. Okay, so I want to make sure to move along here because it's already 5:25. Implementation. So I'm going to breeze through these. These are the basics of what you can kind of be keeping in mind if you're interested in helping us out with these wicked problems. The WCAG 2.0 is a standard that's an international standard put out by the W3C. This is the standard. There's A, AA, and AAA, and AA is the standard that a lot of these lawsuits are leaning towards. So that's the expectation that they have, is that websites are brought up to AA. The basics of that are that the website has to be perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So it has to work on different devices. You have to be able to understand it easily. You have to be able to navigate from pane to pane or from thing to thing. And you have to be able to actually see that it's there, right? So that's something to research more. There's lots of good bedtime reading if you go to the W3C and want to learn more about WCAG. It's pretty pretty technical. That's the best way. There's 3 levels, like I said, A, AA, and AAA, and then there's 4 things that you'll kind of see throughout these standards. Keyboard navigation, like you saw the video demo of. Image description, so actually putting a description with an image, describe what this slide has. By the way, my slides I have designed to be accessible. All the images have image descriptions. I will be putting them up on my blog and tweeting them out if you want to check them out. And I'm happy to share my slides with you. Color contrast, so that's for people, lots of times people with color blindness or just different types of vision impairments. You see like younger people designing with like light gray, really small font, and that makes it difficult for a lot of us to be able to read. Yeah?
What do you mean when you say a picture in this slide is accessible?
So, so the way that I made this picture, that I put the image description on it, is I went to format picture. Now you're going to check me and see if it's really there, right? Alt text, figure in wheelchair at base of staircase. So each of my images has that. And then there's other things that I've done structurally within the slide deck so that if a screen reader user were navigating through the slide deck, they'd be going in the same order that it makes sense to go in, right? Because you don't necessarily want them to first, because they're just listening. It's a linear type of an experience, right? You don't want them first to land on the picture that says figure in wheelchair at base of staircase and then have it say 3 levels, 4 biggies, right? You want it to kind of go in the proper order. So that's an image description on a slide deck, but of course they're all over the internet too, right? Yeah. And then captions for video, as we talked about. And in terms of on the creating side of things, technical challenges that you'll run into if you're trying to do this for a website, from my understanding, shopping carts are really tricky to make accessible. Tables are their own animal to make accessible. And then PDFs is like a whole other problem that you can get accessibility evangelists to go on and on and on about how much they loathe PDFs, the accessibility of PDFs. And then design, there's a whole lot of things on design about how to make something accessible. And it's not necessarily just one rule book. Well, there is WCAG, but I mean, it depends, right? Contextually when it comes to design, it's, depends on the user and the use, but there's a lot there to get into. And then on the checking side, things for you to be aware of, there's automated testing, and there's some free tools that you could check out. WebAIM has one called Wave, and I will tweet these out. You're welcome to take a picture of the slide if you want, or just copy it down, or get the slides from me later. WebAIM has a tool called Wave that's free. There's a Chrome accessibility developer tool plugin that you can try out, and then DQ has a free automated testing tool called AXE, A-X-E. And then there are, of course, enterprise companies. I said kind of disparagingly earlier, the ambulance chasers. That's not really the only thing that they do. But they do like the consulting, and then they have enterprise level tools. And the 4 that I know of that are kind of bigger on the scene with their tools are listed there. Accessibility Oz, DQ, SSB BART, and then Carl Groves has a tool as well. So these are just kind of like an SEO tool. Are you familiar with how an SEO spider will crawl a site and see where the SEO errors are? It's the same kind of a thing, except it'll crawl a site and see where the accessibility errors are. And of course, they all have their own, methodology and whatnot, and you could really geek out with them quite a bit on testing and on checking. A lot of times, their business is going to be with people after they've gotten sued. But for you as creators in the creating side, you can use them in the creation process to make sure that what you're creating is accessible as you go. And then, of course, you can't just rely on that. You also need to bring in user testing, right? So that's what this other side is bringing in people with disabilities to make sure that what it is that you're creating is hitting the mark. Because you can't just rely on the testing tools. They're not going to get everything anyway. Questions on any of that?
I just have an overview question on when we might expect to see a conflict between legal standards imposed by the government on private corporations and the right of a company to use on their website the typography they want to use, the color scheme they want to use for design, or in another case, just the language they want to use. If you're having a cognitive disability, is the language on Target's website too hard for someone to understand, so the government comes and says you can't phrase something like that?
Like with plain language standards.
Yeah. Are we close to that at all?
What do you think, Bruce?
I wasn't, honestly, I was just talking to Andre.
Oh, the question is around, like, where that line is drawn, or where we're kind of going with things as far as the legal system coming in and enforcing websites to become more across the board accessible when it comes to typography and color scheme, plain language.
As you stated, right, if you're a government agency or selling software to a government agency, right, you have to self-certify that your application or website, whatever it is, in fact, right, 508 compliant, right? And to David's question about that, Europe and a lot of other countries around the world are now at that point, David. I don't know enough about how enforcement works, but I have colleagues that I've talked to in Italy and in the UK and such, and it is something, in the forefront of their development minds because of the law and such. So, to answer your question, I think it's always important to consider, right, and know your audience, in addition to knowing what kinds of things are percolating within guidelines from government agencies, and align all those things together and be aware of all those things. So I don't know if that, David, answers your question, but I know as someone like myself, I always have to know who the audience, the budget, the law, all those things surrounding a project, and they all get taken into consideration. And I'm not the one who makes the decision. The customer holds the burden of responsibility for, now I can make them aware of those things, but it's up to them to ultimately determine how they want to meet, exceed, or not think about those things.
That touches on a follow-up question about whether agencies and freelance web developers, designers would have to be somehow insured against a lawsuit over accessibility violations for private companies if they design a website for a private company. If a site was expensive in the first place to develop, and then for some reason it had to be radically redesigned, or even substantially redesigned, that could cost a lot of money. So I'm wondering if that line has been crossed yet.
I can speak a little bit to that. I don't have, there's not one answer for sure that applies to everybody, and it's really different if you're talking about creating a website versus creating an application, for example. It's certainly in your best interest, if you're hiring a company to create a product for you, to ask them to guarantee their level of accessibility, and then to get an outside perspective on if they've satisfied that or not. But it is kind of a moving target. If you're, for example, if you have an app that you're developing, and you want universities or K through 12 institutions to pick it up, if you're in e-learning or any kind of educational software, for example, then that's a business decision that a lot of people in that market they're bringing that on themselves to make sure that it is accessible to the standards, because it's being demanded of them by their customers, right? As far as web development, then it's really going to depend on who your audience is and who your customer is. And like I said before, I mean, here we are on the day after the election. You know, how things have been going these past couple of years might be drastically different these next couple of years. Yeah.
But if the new administration doesn't change the current direction, David, I think it will be at some point kind of a requirement.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of examples of what I've done as a marketer, and thinking about accessibility and just working with, you know, my own bandwidth and my client budget and whatnot are the things that I'd like to close with and get through, and then we'll see if there are any more questions at the end here. I worked with a company called Accessibility Oz that I mentioned earlier. They have one of those automated testing tools. I learned so much with them. They're based out of Australia, actually, and I got to go to Australia and meet their team, and I learned so much about accessibility just from going to different conferences with them. Their market is people who are needing to remediate their websites or make new websites, right? So for me, in my role as marketing manager with them, it was looking at who their audience was, which is really, you know, among these programmers and, you know, and large brand names. We pitched to McDonald's and the United Nations and really, you know, big brands who are trying to make sure that their applications and sites are accessible. But, you know, being there in that space, what we really wanted to make sure was that their website was really easy to use with a screen reader, right? And it was easy for us to do that. Our developers knew how to do that because we were in that space already. And of course, making sure that the content kind of spoke to, why did I write content here? That'll come to me. So for me, in my experience with Accessibility Oz, it was, in terms of making their marketing assets more accessible, it was more about making them accessible for people with screen readers than it was about people who are deaf, for example. And part of that is that it's so wordy, right? Because you get into people who use screen readers and they just want the text. They want to hear exactly what it is that is being said, whereas a lot of the content that's out there is very picture heavy, and, you know, a picture says 1,000 words. So we were dedicating more of our assets towards that demographic. And then Terp Savvy is a client that I have now. They do e-learning for sign language interpreters. And, you know, so it's a lot of online video content and modules to help sign language interpreters get certified. And, you know, what we look at there is that sign language interpreters are often not at their desks. They're often out, so making sure that what they have is mobile friendly, making sure that there's lots of video. And not a lot of sign language interpreters are blind. Just saying. Like, if you're a sign language interpreter, you probably need to be able to see the sign language, right? So yes, we want to make sure that a deaf-blind person, for example, who's visiting the site could access the content, but that's not the first thing that we're going to be thinking of when we're creating their content and thinking about their accessibility. It's going to be more about their customer base, which are the sign language interpreters, and, you know, kind of making sure that they have something that's mobile so they can grab it when they're out and about, and appealing to them that way. And then my last example, Shape Hair Design, is a client of mine here in, they're over in East Portland. And we had an interesting couple of campaigns with them because they were just starting out their salon, and they wanted to have a good social presence and a good website that looked great for their clients, that their clients could book online for example. But what they were really looking for was they were part of that war for talent, right? They were really looking to entice and bring in 2 new hairstylists, because they had two hairstylists already, and then they had 2 empty seats, so they were looking to recruit some hairstylists. So our campaigns, you know, they weren't all in your face like, come work for us, come work for us. It was more subtle than that. So we were talking about the culture of the company, we were talking about kind of what it was that they had going on, but what we were really trying to do was, you know, we wanted our content to be interesting and available to the clientele and for it to be applicable to the clientele. But what we really wanted was for these candidates to be intrigued and to get an idea of what they were getting into. So thinking about that, of course, they have clientele who are baby boomers and young and, you know, all sorts of types of people with disabilities, right, or people without disabilities. But what we thought about more was that, you know, a lot of hairstylists have, like, you know, some like upper body, they use their upper body a lot and maybe have motion injuries, so we're thinking about making sure that it's not stuff that they have to like click through a lot of and trying to get the idea through to someone who's doesn't have a lot of time with the computer. So it gets a little bit tricky because you have this deep body of knowledge around accessibility for people with all these disabilities, and then you get into excuse me, working on it with specific brands. And my client is not, you know, McDonald's or the United Nations at this point, so I wasn't solving those wicked accessibility problems for them. But it's always about matching your audience. And that's where I end up with it at the end of every day. So that's about it. There's my contact information again. I'll come back to this slide. But I do want to say before I wrap up that I hope if you can make it to our meetup on December 5th, we have an accessibility UX group that meets up oftentimes at Puppet Labs. This one's a kind of more informal happy hour at the Green Dragon on December 5th at 6:30 p.m. And we have a group on Meetup. If you're on, oh, we didn't even list that as a social media. Who here is on Meetup? Oh, you gotta get yourselves on Meetup. So get on Meetup and look there for PDX, AUX, or email me or message me and I'll send you the information for coming to the Meetup and learning more about accessibility in the digital space. Cool, thank you so much. Again, _Eliza G is my Twitter. ElizaGreenwood@gmail.com is my email address, and then my website is ElizaGreenwood.com. How'd we do? How are we doing?
Questions for Eliza? I know somebody has
questions. Bluegrass, right? Bluegrass?
Yeah. What about a lot of people are getting older who might have baby boomers. What about the issues with accessibility as people get older and you see some of those things feeding in like vision and so even cognitive impairment, people are getting Alzheimer's and other things that people, what's being done to that? To give people continue to give people accessibility to the facilities they had when they were younger.
That is such a great question, and it's interesting too because a lot of times people won't claim having a disability, right? Like, I've had temporary disabilities in my life, but I haven't necessarily wanted to say, oh yeah, I'm disabled, or I might be experiencing something now, but like to actually take on that label and claim it feels like a leap over a line, right? And I think that a lot of people who are kind of aging into disability find themselves in that category as well. So, like I said, IBM's doing a whole bunch of research for the aging population. Did you have thoughts to add, Bruce?
It is a problem, right? And one thing that maybe a tangent to this is, right, the types of things that are going on with digital, right, are becoming, I'll just say more and more complex, visually complex, cognitively complex. And while it's great for younger folks to be able to adapt, right, some of those things are even for myself, I'll admit it, I'm like, what? I'm like, the user experience of some things, especially on web, not so much mobile, but on the web, it's just, it makes me crazier.
Yeah.
Barry, we see all, technology pushing far ahead, individuals pushing far ahead, user experience pushing, boundaries and such for differentiation, right? But
memory issues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Memory issues, for example, remembering, when you get around, do all these things.
Sure.
Pages get more complex.
Yep. I know that people talk about Internet of Things in that context quite a bit. you don't remember what's in your fridge, you've got, you know, an image of it right on your phone, or there's a whole world of Internet of Things that will probably assist in that case. Yeah.
So kind of to follow up with his question, a little personal info, like my mom, she lives with me and has a lot of like cognitive, and she's legally blind, and so like I would love for her to be able to spend more time on the internet, and so would she, because she can't drive anymore. Like she would love to have packages come to the house every day, you know, but she like will get stuck at the shopping cart and think that she already bought it. So like I'm always curious, like, is there something I can buy for her to help her with that, instead of her handing me the iPad and saying, can you buy this for me? Like, I don't know, like, what's out there for things like that, or is there?
Well, I know I went and led a training at the Louisiana Center for the Blind, which is an NFB center, and it was all about social media for job readiness and making yourself, you know, more findable online. And it was a really interesting experience for me at this center, because, you know, I had 30, 45 people in the classroom there, and some of them had just gotten to the center, and others of them had been there for quite some time. But basically what the people who are at the center are there doing is learning how to navigate not just technology, but, you know, getting from one room to the next, or one building to the next, and it's a whole skill set, right? So I'm sure that there's a whole variety of technology, depending on what your mom's needs are and what her comfort is, that if she dedicates herself to kind of training herself how to use it, which is always that thing, like, oh, I don't want to use something new, that, yeah, she might be able to find some more independence in her life. And there are resources here in Oregon for the Oregon Commission for the Blind, that has she worked with them, do you know? Or I'm not in Oregon. In Washington they have one too. So that might be, you know, worth looking into. There's lots of good free resources for people with vision impairments.
And while you were talking about that, I'm like, why don't they have just a big, large, green-ass button that says, you purchased?
Yes.
You know,
A large, big, green-ass button.
With, especially on Amazon, it's like,
it is.
Just like, boom, in
right?
your face. Those buttons. Yeah.
Right?
Easy. She'll wait for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then I later find out, you never bought it.
Oh my gosh.
Actually, the IoT buttons, remember? The dash button and, you know, the coffee button and all those things. You click it and the packages show up. There's Oh, that's a great idea. All right, Eliza, we have one more question?
One question, and this is going to sound, the way I'm wording this is going to sound weird, so please don't take offense. But accessibility for some parts of businesses could be a barrier to entry. That's what I mean, it sounds weird. So, like for instance, when the internet first started, it's very robust now, and the CSS and all the HTML has all these tools you can use now for accessibility. There's a lot that the technology's caught up with the times to give people accessibility. But when the internet and websites were first starting out, everyone was just kind of learning this stuff, and accessibility wasn't really something people thought about. And if these applications had been forced upon the industry in the beginning, we might not be where we are today, because maybe it wouldn't have flourished the way it did.
Yeah.
So, I guess you could have a great idea, whereas if you had these rules for accessibility, it would never get off the ground because it was too big of a barrier to program it or do it. I mean, does that make sense?
I mean, you're talking about
the technologies had to kind of catch up. The voice recognition has had to catch up with what you need in order to make it work. So, do you guys see that as any kind of like issue down the road?
I mean, I think you're talking about like boiling the ocean, right? Like, there's these technology.
You know, if you had a rule that you had to have this accessibility rules, say 1993 for the web, would we be where we are today with accessibility? Or would the web have developed the way it has? I mean, maybe I'm not making
sense. It's like the auto industry and airbags, right? Yeah. There's so many things where certain things come along, right, and they evolve, and they innovate.
But it's after the fact. It's not.
Yeah, it's hard for me to imagine that they.
It's not the rule going in, because once the thing is up and running, you go like, oh, we need to make this available to everybody.
Right.
Whereas you can't make it available to everybody because it's in its infant stage.
It's hard for me to imagine that they would have had airbags in the first automobiles. They probably brought them in because they realized that there was a problem. Yeah.
They saw it as a need.
Yeah.
It wasn't part of the initial idea.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm a legally blind guy and I can't drive. Why aren't there autonomous vehicles for me?
Right, exactly. That's kind of what I'm getting.
Why wasn't that when they
the
first
technology isn't there yet?
Exactly.
Do we have one more question? Or are we?
I was just gonna say, with his response though, is that a problem, I think the biggest problem with this issue is that from a business standpoint, everybody wants to do the minimal possible rather than do what should be done. We wanna do minimal bottom line, spend as least amount of money as possible.
Yeah.
So that's where the stipulations that even though, they've been in place for so many years, they're so outdated for what the need really is.
Yeah, I mean, I went and I did my one video in sign language, right? And I'm like, hey, deaf friends, I'm renovating my house, so stay tuned. You'll see, right? And then since then, I haven't gone back and added captions because I was unpacking my boxes, like I was doing other things.
Well, thank you, Eliza.
Thank you.